Now, Samuel died. Might be worth circling. It's a big point of the story here. And all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. The last chapter ended with Saul and David reaching an uneasy truce with one another. David had been running from Saul because Saul was trying to kill him. David had the opportunity to take Saul's life out in the wilderness, chose not to, and spared him. So that really moved Saul. That allowed him to take a step back and say, what have I done? And David didn't go back to the capital city. He didn't go back to be near Saul because he was a wiser man than that. But at least in this chapter, there is a truce that Saul and David have reached. It's soon to be broken. The next chapter is going to see Saul chasing down David again. But first we have this terrible blow that strikes the land of Israel with the death of Samuel. And we've been reading about the life of Samuel. We've since moved on towards talking about Saul and now David in the book. But you remember Samuel was born miraculously to a barren woman. He was raised in God's house and heard the voice of the Lord from a very young age. He led Israel into a time of national repentance and revival when the Ark of the Covenant was stolen. He had anointed both kings, Saul and David. And Samuel was honored by all of Israel. Even those that were opposed to each other honored Samuel. And this is a significant moment in salvation history as well, because Samuel was the last prophet who also functioned as a judge, or really I should say he was the last judge, the first prophet in that way, as we describe them in the Bible. He was that transitional figure, and with him, that era of the judges is officially over. Not only that, Samuel was a mentor for David. We had seen back in chapter 19, verse 18, that when Saul first started chasing David, David ran to Ramah to be with Samuel. So when David had trouble, he went to the man of God. And you can understand that they must have had a rather close relationship. David looked up to him. David was a godly man. And I would imagine Samuel is giving David all sorts of advice over how to conduct himself as king. Maybe pointing to Saul's example and saying, not like that. Let me tell you what God has said. And now he's gone. There are moments like this in every man's life where the people you have looked to lead you and guide you and instruct you are gone. Whether that just comes through a transition of life, whether you move, sometimes there's a falling out, sometimes it is death. But there comes a point, especially for men, where they have to say, okay, they can't help me anymore. It's time for me to grow up and be my own man. And that is a hard process to go through. That is why so much of even ancient literature, but even into the modern day, involves that transition from boy to man, from growing up, from being a child and being dependent upon your father or upon somebody else, to growing up and standing on your own 2 feet. Men will even get into their later years where they have children and even grandchildren of their own. They have gray hair in their head, and they're still wondering, do I measure up to the proper standard of what a man ought to be? And this is a tough thing. I think it was actually Ernest Hemingway, who we think of him as far as manly men in American history, he's one of those guys. But he has a quote that he said to one of his sons, and I forget which it was, but he said, son, it's a hard thing to be a man. Because even he recognized that living up to what that's supposed to be is a hard thing. And we all know how this feels. And I'm specifically talking about men today because of the way the story is going to unfold. How do we manage this? How do we manage this transition from boy to man? Now, of course, it's God that's going to help you, but there's actually something that the Bible tells us that God does to aid us and assist us in that transition, and it may not be what you expect. In Genesis 2:24, talking about that process, the Lord said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. In the Garden of Eden, God said everything was good except one thing. It is not good for Adam to be alone. I will make him a helper that is suitable for him. The means that God has provided for you to grow and become your own man is to bring a good woman into your life. Now I'm just going to give this disclaimer one time, okay? You do not need to be married. You do not need to have a certain status of life in order to become a godly man. Paul was not married, neither was our Lord Jesus Christ. However, this is the way it usually works, and this is something that the Bible talks about extensively, so disclaimer over, we're going to proceed forwards. one of the main ways God provides for a man to become his own man and to grow up into that role that he's supposed to be is to bring a good woman into his life. Men need their wives. And our wives need to learn to take up that role that God has given to them with joy and not with resentment. We're living in a day that is historic in the amount of marriages that are disintegrating all around us. Even in our own congregation, friends, it has been touch and go for an awful lot of us about whether or not we're going to continue to do this. We have got to relearn how to help one another in this way. And we're going to today talk about how Abigail is going to help first Nabal, her husband, but then also David, who will become her husband by the end of this story. And I'm glad I get the chance to talk about this because I will tell you, many, and in fact most of the conflicts that I have seen lately in marriages and in those sorts of relationships, the women have been a big part of the problem. And this might be unusual for you to hear because usually we're picking up the guys and slapping them back and forth across the face and saying, get your act together. Well, this is not always the case. And it may just be circumstances and coincidences, but there are an awful lot of ladies in the church even who do not recognize that there is a responsibility upon them, such as Abigail is going to exemplify for us today. So I hope that we will all listen to this and take it to heart. It's kind of a lighthearted story, but there's some very serious things for us to learn here as we talk about marriages, relationships, and so on. So verse 2. Actually, the end of verse 1 going into verse 2. So David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. He knows good and well that if Samuel's gone, Saul really is going to be coming after him now, and that's what's going to happen in chapter 26. But there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. What a great translation that is. Harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite, descendant of Caleb. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him, Shalom, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. We meet this harsh and badly behaved man named Nabal. We'll see this in a little bit. The word Nabal means fool. Every time in the book of Proverbs when it says the wise man does this, but the fool does such and such, that is the same word, Nabal in Hebrew. Means fool. I don't know why his mama gave him that name. Maybe she knew a little something about him. But in any case, he is a rich man descended from the clan of Caleb. Now you know the story of Caleb. Caleb was one of those that stood by Joshua and said, we will go into the promised land. We will slay the giants. They are bread for us. He's the one that got to go into the promised land. He's the one that slew the giants. He said, give me the mountains. He was the father of Achsah, who married Othniel, who was the first judge we see in the book of Judges. It's an amazing family name to be a part of. And then you get this guy, harsh and badly behaved. But I'll bet you he really played up the fact that he was descended from a hero of Israel. David has been providing protection for his flocks. David has a band of warriors that are out in the wilderness, and apparently they came across the flocks of Nabal, and so they've been protecting them. We'll read about this more in a little bit. They'll explain that David and his mighty men, they were watching out for the flocks and making sure bandits didn't attack us. They didn't do anything to us. They didn't hurt us. So when sheep shearing time comes around, which in this culture, that's a big deal. It's like payday. We're finally going to have that the wool that we're going to use and make some money. So they would have a big celebration. They have a feast. So David sends men to Nabal and says, will you please give us something to celebrate the feast with? And the humility of David is amazing here. He's saying, give it to your son. He's coming humbly. He's saying, hey, feast is coming up. We provided some help for your guys, and we didn't ask for anything, but would you help us be able to celebrate the feast? We'd really, really appreciate that. This is entirely within David's rights in this culture. Now, we tend to think, whoa, boundaries, man, don't ask me for something. But gift giving is and was a very big part of this culture. We helped you, and we're asking for you to help us out. So Nabal's reaction here makes him look harsh and badly behaved. Makes him look petty. Makes him look small. Like, you've been sitting there doing nothing, and all they're asking is, hey, can we celebrate with your men? We don't have anything to celebrate. We're poor, but we did help you out. And he goes, oh, look at you running away from your masters. See, this is the problem today. This is the problem with the world, is nobody listens to their masters and nobody stays in their place. So no, I'm not helping you at all. He insults David. And he insults David so much, he says, this guy, all right, we'll see what he thinks of our protection now. And they strap on their swords. They're ready to go. They leave the baggage behind. They're going to go and lay waste to Nabal's house. What Nabal represents for us this morning is a false vision of masculinity that is as old as the hills, friends. That to be a real man, like Caleb, right, who I think all of us reading our Bibles say, that's the kind of man we want to be like. But if you want to be like that, you want to have that title of being a real man, first of all, you got to have money. You got to be loaded. If you're not making at least 6 figures, what kind of a man are you? You know, what kind of man are you if you can't, now forget provide for your family, if you can't give them everything they'd ever want, and if you aren't recognized when you walk around the who's who, and if you're not taking vacations in the most luxurious places. It's really funny because we were able, blessed this time to go to Disney World this year with our family, which was a lot of fun to go with the kids. And you find out when you get there that there's a tier ranking of the kind of vacation you can have there. It's like if you want to spend money on something, they will gladly take it from you. And then there's like rankings. Like, oh man, this is so cool. I never got to do this when I was a kid. We get to go and be here. And I didn't feel bad about it, but it was very plain. It's like, hey, if you want to spend $20,000 more, then you can really have a vacation. And it's that kind of thing. But you can be comparing cars. You can be comparing net worth. You can be comparing suits and shoes. You can compare trucks. You can compare whatever you like. And that's how we grade ourselves. And there's also an arrogance and a braggadocio. If you don't have swagger that goes along with it, it's not enough to have those things. You got to be posting pictures. You got to be getting girls to stand in front of your fishing boat so everybody knows this boat is what gets me all the ladies. You've got to be talking about who you are and have that swagger. Otherwise, yeah, you might have it, but you're not really manly about it. It's not masculine enough. And you know, as damaging as that vision is, and as we all kind of sit here and go, okay, well, you know, cool-headed in the clear light of day, 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I can admit, yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. However, there's a reason it keeps coming up generation after generation and across cultures. It's because, number one, it is just similar enough to the truth that we can be deceived, because it is good to provide for your family. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do well and to succeed. And there's nothing wrong with if you've got to paying for that extra super duper Disney World package and having a couple boats and having some great trucks. That's wonderful. That's awesome. The Bible tells us that the rich ought to enjoy what God has given with gratitude and with generosity. Okay? So there's that similarity to the truth, but you tie it with this appeal to the flesh that says, I would want that. I would want people to feel about me the way I feel about that guy. I want people to turn their head and look at me. I want people to be envious and jealous of me, and everybody to know that I'm on top. And it makes it compelling, especially, ladies, I will tell you, for the men in your life. And you might sit back, and most godly Christian women would be like this. Aren't we just happy with what we have? Well, there's a good chance that from time to time, your man feels the temptation to look around at what he has and say, man, I'm a loser. Yeah, we finally got the house, but look at that guy's house. Yeah, we got the car, that's nice, but look at that guy's car. Yeah, we've got kids, but look at how good those kids are at football and baseball compared to mine. And yeah, we've got this much money and it's good, but man, that guy's making, and that comes in from time to time. And we see the guys on TV and we see the athletes and we see the folks that are trying to sell you, a pyramid scheme to get rich in 40 days. And we go, I want a piece of that. There's a reason those mafia movies are so popular with guys. They're all cautionary tales about, if you go this way, you're going to end up in jail. Nobody remembers that part. They just remember, just flashing $100 bills everywhere you go and everybody talking about how great you are. It's even in the scriptures. Psalm 73, Asaph, one of the singers, he says at the beginning of the psalm, he says, I almost blew this one. Because I almost lost it. My foot almost stumbled. And what was the thought in his mind that almost made him stumble? In Psalm 73, verses 12 through 13, this is what was in his head. Behold, these are the wicked, always at ease. They increase in riches. All in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. Even the writer of Scripture, the singer in the temple, Asaph said, I've wasted my whole life being so righteous. Because look at all the stuff the wicked have. Now he goes on to say, now when I go to the house of the Lord, I remember their end. But I want you to see, especially you ladies, because we guys get this. Ladies, this is something your man has struggled with or struggles with now to one degree or another. Even David, the man after God's own heart, who is content, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Well, right now, he's suffering in the wilderness, running away from his father-in-law who's trying to kill him. He's surrounded by these rowdy men that he can barely keep in line, guarding sheep. He's not even a shepherd anymore. He's security for the shepherd. And here comes this loud, harsh, badly behaved man who is rolling in the dough, who is carrying the family name of Caleb and is somebody who throws shade and insults him to his face in front of all of his men. And that causes even David to be provoked and rise up. We'll see who's the real man around here. This is very common. We can be tempted by these things. We can be provoked by these things. It is hard for a man to do the right thing in the face of the taunts of wicked men. And we are susceptible to acting rashly. Whether that's seeing the car your neighbor's washing so you run off and you put yourself in all kinds of debt so that you've got a bigger one, or maybe you even get violent like David did. I'm trying to explain the masculine mind to you ladies because there's a woman in this story who understood that very well, and we're going to learn more about her right now. Verse 14. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields as long as we went with them. So you see, David is not being presumptuous at all. In fact, the men that were out there probably encouraged him to ask Nabal for something. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. Worthless man in Hebrew, that's son of Belial. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Probably smart. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. Well, the servants see how Nabal treats David's servants. And they know this is not going to end well. You just insulted a guy who has a private army and who killed Goliath. And when he was asked to kill 100 Philistines for his bride price, he went out and killed 2 just to show how tough he was. And our master just insulted him to his face. Not only that, he was acting badly and ungratefully towards David. So they go to Abigail. It says Nabal's beautiful and discerning wife. How many beautiful and discerning women have ended up with harsh and badly behaved men? Well, they come to warn her and also to defend David. Now, Abigail acts very shrewdly here. What does she do? She gathers all the food for the men. She gets all the stuff they would have asked for and rides out to meet them without telling her husband. Now, it was very common in this time for the woman to be in charge of the keeping of the house, the homemaking, as you would call it. Today, we tend to think of that as cooking and cleaning. But at this point, for someone that was wealthy especially, she was kind of like the manager of the house. So she probably handled the in and out all the time. But because they had gone to Nabal first and not her, as we're going to read in a moment, then he probably never would have missed it. But now he's gone ahead and made trouble. So she goes out to take care of this. And meanwhile, we see David ranting and raving to his men about his injured pride. He's kind of like having that pre-fight press conference about how this guy disrespected me and I'm going to drop him like a bad habit and here we go. But what you need to see there is, okay, David is writing out, and he might seem justified to you and to me, but he's playing the same game that Nabal is playing. He has just entered into a contest of harshness and bad behavior with Nabal. Nabal acted foolishly. He acted like a bad guy, but he has provoked David into doing the same thing. Hey, could I please have something to celebrate the festival with your men? No, get out of here, you're a loser, and if you come back here again, I'm going to call the police on you. Well, fine, then you and your whole family are dead. Okay, David's not in the right here. I want to make sure that was just cleared up. And here's Abigail, who is saying, all right, how are we going to fix this? A discerning woman, meaning she's able to look at a situation and determine what to do. The title today, as I said, is A Strong Man Needs a Good Woman, and here's why. This is so important. A good woman, a wife, is not there, number one, just to be window dressing for your life, gentlemen. Now, that's a very common way we look at things. And as with most things, there is a grain of truth. We would like to have a beautiful woman. She's a good credit to you when you have that. But if you think that she's just there to make you look good, that's a bad way to look at your wife. It's probably how Nabal looked at Abigail. But nor, ladies, are you there to be in this marriage just so that you can be pampered and you can be spoiled and he can do everything for you so that you can have a free ride through life. Both of those things exist. Hopefully none of them are in this church. But that's not what a wife's role is. A wife is to contribute to the life of her husband. First of all, physically. And I'm not just talking about sexuality, although that is a big part of it. I'm not going to get into any of that today. But if you read Proverbs 31, I'm going to read from it in a minute. It's about managing the things that her husband does. It's about contributing to the life of the family, not just being there and taking it all in. She contributes emotionally to her husband. Ladies, you just need to stop complaining right now that your husband is not as emotionally sensitive as you are. He never will be, and you wouldn't like him if he was. That's your part to play. Your part is to be the emotional one and to support and help him work through those things. And also, number 3, to contribute spiritually. The husband is the spiritual head of the household, but ideally, there is a partnership that doesn't require any kind of hierarchy in the household, where we are both committed to serving the Lord together, and she's there to support him and to push him in that direction, as Abigail is going to do for David in just a moment. Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 12. An excellent wife who can find? There is no shortage of videos posted online, people asking exactly that question. An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. There's so much foolishness out there where you marry your woman, but don't ever trust her because you know what they're like. That sounds like a great marriage you're building for yourself right there. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. I'm just going to read that again. It's just so good. An excellent wife who can find? Far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. In particular, relating to our subject this morning, a good woman like Abigail, who is one of the Proverbs 31 women of the Bible. A good woman knows the heart of men and how to help them in their masculinity. Do you see how Abigail looks at this situation and immediately understands what's going on and knows how to help? She's going to continue this in the following section. That she understands, this is how my husband is acting, this is how this other man is acting. I understand this kind of conflict, and I know how to diffuse it and to make it work for them both. She has an understanding of the male mind and the male heart. Of course, today, And I hope this is nothing going on in our congregation, but it seeps in. Today, there is this war against toxic masculinity. That word toxic, if I never hear that word again, I'll be just fine with it. Because everyone is just so toxic. But what that means is, well, we didn't get along yesterday. That doesn't mean you're toxic. That just means you're living a life with real people. But anyhow, that's the whipping boy of today, is this toxic masculinity. And what that basically means is women blaming men for not being more like women. So, well, why are they like that? Why are they just like that? Why is David even responding to that insult? Why does Nabal have to say that? What difference does it make? Why do they never cry? Why do they never show their sensitive side? Pair that with the fact that the minute we do that, the ladies are like, why is he acting like that? I don't know if I'm not attracted to him anymore. Yeah, go figure. You don't believe me. You spend any time, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, there is no share of women calling themselves authorities on relationships and on marriage, telling you exactly what's wrong with every man you've ever met. And they'll use words like toxic or problematic or patriarchal or just kind of say, are men okay? Why are they acting like this? It's like they've been acting like that for thousands of years, sweetheart. Welcome to the party. This is how we are. And so this seeps into the church. And I have less jokey now. I have seen this in the congregation where I'll be sitting across the table from a woman telling me about her husband, and she's not saying anything that's wrong scripturally. She's just throwing out terms that she's heard on the internet because she doesn't understand how her husband ticks, and she's sitting there trying to think, I'm going to tell him how he has to be. But Abigail understood something. She understood that men need to feel needed and respected more than anything else. A man needs to feel needed. He needs to feel respected more than anything. He will take zero affection and 100% respect from you every single time. And you think, well, that's just so hard. That's such a terrible way to live. No, that's how we are. You're different than him. He looks at you and he thinks you're like an alien too. I don't understand that. Why would we want to cry about that? What's that going to solve? Right? Then I'm at elbows right now is great. That just tells me that I'm on the right track here. Abigail understood something. She said, that provocation that Nabal offered David is not something to be lightly brushed aside. I can sit here and say, oh, these boys and the way they act, they're never gonna amount to anything. I don't know why I stay with this guy. Instead, she goes, my husband insulted this man. This man is a warrior, and he's coming after my husband. She understood that. She's not sitting there blaming them. She's not sitting there criticizing them. She says, I'm going to go about doing what needs to be done to bring them to terms. So here's your instruction, ladies. You've got to take the time to understand how your husband ticks. Instead of sitting around telling him how he's got to change and how he's got to be better, how about you just come at it like a scientist and just gather information for a while? What angers him? What makes him happy? What causes him to shut down and stop talking to me? What causes him to want to spend extra time away from the family? But then again, when is he just excited to be home, and what gets him smiling and what gets him out of bed in the morning? Only thing that gets him excited is football. Okay, why? Have you ever thought about that? You ever stopped to consider why? The only thing he ever wants to do is go hang out with his buddies. You ever wonder why that is? Have you ever thought like that? Trying to understand your husband? There's all manner of good resources on this, but you've got to learn to meet your man on his terms. Who he is, not on yours. Not showing up with a list of demands and saying, unless you become more like me, this isn't going to work. He'll never be like you. That's why the divorce rate is so high. Because we come to each other, and this could work the other way, you understand, but I'm going with the angle the Bible is giving us here. But when we say, I refuse to understand you, and unless you get more like me, we're going to leave, that's why they break up. That's why marriages end. But the thing is, you're going to find another person, and he's going to be a man just like the previous one was. And then you're going to say something stupid like, all men are trash. It's like, or all men are different from women, and you need to take the time to understand why that is. And that it's not sinful and it's not evil. It's just different. Verse 23, let's see how Abigail handles this situation. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. See how humble she is? Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow, Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. Remember, Nabal means fool. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. Really cool illustration there, huh? And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. They all knew the famous Goliath story, didn't they? And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. Abigail arrived and bowed down before David, calling him my Lord, calling herself your servant. Incredible humility here. Not showing up and I'm just going to give that man a talking to and tell him what's what. Just a little piece of information, ladies. If you want to come to an angry man and calm him down, you talking loud is not going to help anything. Just take that one for free. But she shows up and she says, I'm going to take the blame. She says, look, I'm usually the one that handles these kinds of transactions. That if there's money to be paid out, if there's gifts to be given, I handle those things. Nabal just does his own thing. They went directly to him. They didn't know. I should have been there. I should have been able to manage the situation. I'm sorry, but please, look, I brought you everything you want. Don't do this, David. He says, my husband's a fool. I know he is. His name is Fool, and that's exactly what he is. And she helps David think spiritually. Do you see this? She sees God's hand in this, restraining him from murder. She reassures him, God is going to raise you up to be king no matter what, because God has said it. And God is going to bless you. She says, you don't want to be prince over Israel, fighting the Lord's battle, knowing in the back of your mind that you had this blood guilt on your hands. Don't violate your conscience today, David. Let me just make peace right now and it'll be okay. And David is calmed. David blesses her for a wise woman. He comes to himself. He goes, good thing you came out here, because I would have murdered every single person in that household if it wasn't for you. Turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Ladies, if you don't know this passage, I would highly recommend you take some time and read through it and meditate over it, because it's written directly to you. Peter writes, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, meaning if you're married to a non-Christian husband, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear. Let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, just as how Abigail was calling David my Lord just now. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Peter's telling us there is power in the respect of a woman to guide her husband to Jesus. Let's break through this passage just real quickly. We'll do a little mini verse-by-verse study, so you get a 2-for-1 today. But it's so relevant to what we're talking about. The New Testament tells wives how to conduct themselves when their husbands aren't acting right. You don't need to be going to a therapist or some podcaster to learn how to do that, ladies. Jesus has told you how to do it. Wives, be subject to your own husbands. This means you need to respect the rank and the hierarchy that God has established between a husband and a wife. He is your head. That is what the Lord has said. And if you are going to resist that, you are resisting what God has instituted. Now you might say, but he's not a Christian. He's not acting right. He says he's a believer, but he never does the right thing. So that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won. Peter says you need to stay subject to your husband so that when your husband's not acting right, even if he's not saved, he'll come around. How do we do that, ladies? Listen to what he says. They may be won without a word. Don't talk at him. By the conduct of their wives when they see. What kind of conduct? Your respectful and pure conduct. Respectful meaning you're not walking around as if you're his mother, telling him what he's got to do, talking at him, as we say. And pure, you are loyal to that man. You are sexually pure and keeping yourself only to him. If a man that doesn't follow Jesus sees that Jesus causes his wife to be respectful and loyal to him, you don't think he's going to sit up and pay attention to that? Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart. This is such an important lesson too. So many of you ladies, and I don't fault you for this, in fact I commend you for this, spend an awful lot of time making sure you look presentable and respectable when you are with your husband, and especially when you're out with him. Peter is telling you that's not where your priority is. Your priority is the hidden person of the heart. Are you taking an equal and a greater amount of time to prepare your heart in order to be presentable and respectable before your husband? The imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. You want to know the most beautiful thing Peter says here? A gentle and quiet spirit in a woman. Oh, that's so oppressive. That's just so, you're just telling me I've got to be a certain way. You're telling me that this is how it is. Well, this is how men like to keep us down. Well, it's the Word of God. So are you a Christian or aren't you, ladies? Are you cultivating a gentle and quiet spirit? If you're not, you are in disobedience before the Lord. Gentle and quiet. Well, I have something to say too. Yes, ladies, but can I just tell you something? If you are gentle and quiet, your husband will have no problem asking you what you think about something. Because the thing that keeps men from asking their wives' opinion most often is he's afraid he's going to be challenged by you, and he already feels uncertain about what he's going to do, and he's got to take a firm stand and say, this is where we're going to go. He's used to fighting everywhere he goes. And maybe at work, whenever he brings something up to his boss, he gets slapped down. So when he gets home with you, he's not about to get into an argument with you because he knows he's not good with his words, but you are. So the idea that I've got to be loud and aggressive to be heard is wrong-headed. It's backwards. You don't understand how men work. Gentle and quiet. If he knows you're with him and that you're supportive and you're not going to be harsh with him, he won't mind turning to you and say, hon, what do you think? Well, I actually disagree. He'll hear that much more than, what are you thinking, you idiot? Who's going to listen to that? And God says, when I see a woman who is quiet and gentle and supportive of her husband, he says, that is so precious to me. Because that's the way I made it in the garden. And nobody has liked it since then. But when I see somebody doing it right, that's what I'm talking about. This is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands. So if you want to be a godly woman, you want to be a woman that serves Jesus, you want to sit there and raise your hands and say, oh, how I love Jesus. Well, how have godly women conducted themselves? They submitted to their husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And I cannot tell you, I used to teach youth group, because they're little, when you grow up, you learn how to hold back your disagreements with the pastor in the congregation. The teenagers will just tell you. Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and they go, oh, I would never do that. So really, why not? Well, he's not my Lord. He's not my master. Only God is my master. Interesting. If God is really your master, here's God's instructions over how you ought to treat your husband. Now, we don't really talk that way, calling him Lord anymore, but there are things that you can say to your husband to make it very clear, I'm with you and I love you and I'm behind you in this. There's also things you can refrain from saying to your husband. calling him Lord. She was not worried about being perceived as lesser than her husband. She loved him and supported him. They were together. And she said, and this is the way God made it, and he's a great man. Why wouldn't I want to call him my Lord? And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. You got to realize how what's the word, controversial that would have been? Because Peter is writing to the Jewish Christians, if you read this. Peter was the apostle to the Jews. And he tells all the ladies, don't go around saying you're the children of Sarah if you're not going to act like Sarah did. There's power in the respect of a woman. And Abigail lives this out for us. A woman can either cultivate and inspire true masculinity in her husband, or she can thwart it and poison it. You can either, by your conduct, by your words, by your behavior, ladies, you can either make it so easy for your husband to step up and be the man God has called him to be, or you can make it the hardest thing in the world for him. If every time he tries to step up and lead, you're over there micromanaging him and criticizing him and questioning him at every turn, and then it goes wrong and you let him know it, why would he ever try and step up and do that again? Well, if he was a real man, he wouldn't let me break him down. You don't understand, ladies. The power you have is God-given. God-given. And if you are going to use it to criticize him and be the voice of temptation and criticism in his ear, he's either going to shut down and you'll never hear from him again, or he's going to become harsh and he's going to bulldoze you. And you're not going to like that either. And then you're going to come crying to the women at church and saying, I don't know why he acts this way. It could be very well that you have trained him to do exactly that. Most of all, talking about inspiring true masculinity here, look how Abigail reminded David of his higher loyalty to the Lord. You're better than this, David. Yes, I know Nabal is acting wrong. He's acting provoking, and this isn't right the way he is. But you do not want to have this on your conscience. Let me do everything I can physically to make this right, and then call you to the standard that you have held up for yourself. She's not telling me, here's how you've got to be. She says, this is who you are, David. You know this about yourself. You can do this. If you remind your husband of his higher loyalty to Christ in hard moments, you can save him. When he says we've got to do something to provide for these bills, and he's considering something that is unethical, or something that is going to be hard on the family, or something that is going to take you all away from Jesus, you've got to be the one that says, the Lord is the provider for our family, and I would rather us be broke and poor than see us go down this road. Reminding him of that. When you see the way he's treating people, when he's being provoked at work, he's being provoked in the neighborhood, and you can see that David attitude, right? Strap on your sword, like that's what he's thinking. You remind him, hey, but we're servants of Jesus, and he endured suffering for our sake. We can endure insult for his, can't we? There's so much pressure on you, ladies, to ditch your husband if he doesn't measure up. But you're there to help him. You have a responsibility for that man. Do you understand? The Lord is going to look to you one day, and he's going to say, ladies, I told you that you could win your husband without a word. But when he didn't measure up, you kicked him to the curb? I don't want anything to do with him anymore. Not going to do this. There are so many women who have so much loyalty to their children. No one's going to take my kids from me. I'll fight for them to the death. I'm going to give them everything they could possibly hope for. And then when it comes to their husband, I'll get a new one. I don't understand that. You should take that same loyalty you have to your children or to your parents and apply that to your husband, to your man. He's not all he should be. Well, neither are you. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit there and yell at him? Are you going to leave him until you find somebody better? Guess what? You won't, first of all. Or are you going to say, I'm going to do everything I can with my role as a woman, as the most important person in his life. I'm going to do everything I can to help him and support him and point him in the right direction. Don't be afraid of the strength of your husband. Some women do that too. The minute he raises his voice, or the minute he gets physical about a situation, they back off. Don't be like that. I don't like it when you're like that. It's scary. No, you want him to be able to be like that. And if you tell him to put it away too often, he might not be able to produce it at the right time. And don't despise him for being the way he is. Look, you don't even know what to say. You're going to let that man run over you? You're going to let Nabal insult you like that? I'll bet you probably would, because you're just a coward. You're not a real man. A real man wouldn't do that. My ex would never put up with that. You stay with that man. You love that man through it, even when he is the problem. Love that man through it. Do you see how Abigail is providing covering for her husband, who's an idiot? He just put their entire family in danger, and she's just handling it. She's just dealing with it. She's going to do what needs to be done in order to handle the situation quietly and with discernment. Give that a try. If you help that man walk through those times, he will love you for it. And that doesn't mean he's going to turn into some goo-goo romantic dude that just knows everything that you'd ever want him to do. He's going to love you in his way. But if you can understand him and recognize that what he's giving you is the greatest love he knows how to give, you'll be able to accept it for what it really is. Verse 36. See how this ends up. Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Yeah, that fits, doesn't it? So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." Again, the humility of this woman. It's beautiful. And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. Okay, so Abigail goes home to her drunken husband, and she realizes, this is not the time to tell him what happened. So she waits until the next day. She tells him. And it says his heart died within him and he became as a stone. This was likely a stroke of some kind, where he was 10 days, where he's just immobilized until God struck him dead. And David sends men to take her as his wife. Now we hear this, and our culture is so different from this that we can think of that as what a creep, what a predator. What does he think he's doing? David is being incredibly gracious and incredibly honorable in this moment. Her husband is gone, and it's not like she can just go off and go get another job somewhere. He's saying, I want to take care of you. I want to do everything I can to help you after all that you helped me. And she says, okay, and she gains him as her husband. Now, I'll talk about that other thing in a minute. We'll talk about the polygamy aspect of it in just a second. But she gains David, and he gains her. Can I just point out again? Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. Women, if you give your husband 5% of that, he'll do anything you want. Every man in here there's not a man in here who would not kill to have somebody say something like that to him. Who does he think he is? Some kind of king? Well, he sure would like to feel like one every now and then. You can see that Abigail had been the voice of the Holy Spirit for David in this story. David was hot-headed. He was seeing red. He couldn't hear the voice of the Lord. So what does the Lord do? He sends a good woman into his life to speak to him out loud so that he can hear it. And God did fight for him. She tells him, you don't need to fight your battles, David. God will fight for you. He knew that. He was the one writing songs about that. But he needed the reminder. And God did fight for him. God did avenge his insult. There's a verse in Thessalonians that says, it is a righteous thing with God to reward with affliction those who afflict you. Paul even says, why bother avenging yourselves? God will get them way better than you ever could. And he provides for David a constant companion who will be discerning. Hey, what's the best way to find a wife or a husband like this? Is to become the kind of person who deserves a husband or wife like this. Men, you need to conduct yourselves with honor and not let yourself get caught up in that false vision of masculinity. Or the other direction, becoming such a weak-willed little shrimp that nobody wants to be around you. David had the strength to do this, but he knew when to use it. You need to become that kind of man. And you need to also be willing and able to show love to women. This is a reaction to some of the things I've been talking about is, well, they think that we're toxic, then let's be extra toxic, and that'll show them. I'm gonna show those women. You can't treat them right. You can't let them think that they're secure in your life, because then they'll cheat on you. It's ridiculous, preposterous. We're supposed to love our wives. Ladies, if you want to find a man like David, you learn to conduct yourself with respect and with wisdom. You should be showing respect to every man in your life, just like a man should be showing kindness to every woman in his life. You need to learn how men think and how they tick. You not be so caught up in yourself and how you think things ought to be that you ignore the instruction that the Bible gives you of how a woman ought to be. And if you become that kind of man, there'll be no shortage of ladies that would like to talk to you. And you become that kind of woman, I guarantee you, there'll be no shortage of men lining up to ask you out for coffee. What does the word say? Ephesians 5:33 says, "Let each one of you love his wife as himself. Let the wife see that she respects her husband." We did the whole book study, so you all know about it, but all the statistics that we've ever taken, overwhelmingly, when asked, would you rather be loved or respected? Almost all the ladies say loved. Almost all the men say respected. I would rather be respected and not loved, and I would rather be loved than respected. Now, we all say both. Of course, we all want both. I'm trying to show you what's important to each half of that whole that we call marriage. He needs to feel respected. Especially, by the way, ladies, if he gets respect from everybody else and then comes home to your disrespect, you are undermining and eroding the foundation of your own marriage. If he goes to a place where people call him Sir and Mr. Smith or whatever his name is, and people care about his opinion and they want to know what he thinks, and they're asking his advice and his counsel, and he comes home to you, and you've got no time for any of that, better watch out. Because if there's no shortage of women showing respect to your husband, you better be outdoing the rest of them. And the same thing goes for the guys. You understand, this story is about Abigail ministering to David, but it could just as easily apply, and there are other places we'll talk about that. Gentlemen, if you don't show love and affection to your wife, she'll find someone who will. If you're not being intimate with your wife, you're not being emotionally available to your wife, she'll find someone who will, and it will erode the foundation of your marriage. The market, though, is wide open for any man or woman who wants to live their life this way. But many of you, most of us, are probably at the point where, well, I've already been married. I wish I could start over and try again. No, you're missing the point. The point is to start now, to become that person now. Gentlemen, stop chasing a false vision of manhood so that you can be like those 30-second ads you get before YouTube videos and drive around in your Ducati. You want to be successful? By all means, go ahead. I've talked about that all kinds of times. But are you doing it out of arrogance and selfish ambition, or are you doing it because you want to bless your family and you want to do well at something and give glory to God and do all that you can to bless Him? You got to open yourself to the wisdom of the women in your life because they do have something to contribute. I think that's pretty obvious, but I'll just put it out there. She'll see things that you don't. She'll notice things that you don't. Every man in here has come home from some event, and the guy will say, that was a nice time, wasn't it? And she'll go, I didn't like that one lady. What? Why? What was the problem? She was looking at you wrong. She was coming on to you. No, she wasn't. And she's like, yeah, she was. Because she sees things that you don't. She notices things that you don't. And when she comes to you and says, hey, is everything all right? It's probably because she's picking up on something. So stop being like Nabal and be more like David and listen to the Abigail in your life. But I'll tell you this, growing up as a young man in the church, I have heard so many lessons on how men ought to treat their women better. I have been to so many men's events and men's books and men's conferences where we get taken to task by some guy in skinny jeans for not being sensitive enough. You know what that is? That was the infiltration of the church by the feminist movement is what it was. But I've not seen, and of course I haven't been to many ladies' conferences myself, but I have heard from the women in my life, especially my mother who has no patience with this kind of thing, and my wife who has extra no patience for this kind of thing, that ladies are often told instead, rather than you've got to get your act together, they're told you are God's princess. And if that man's not going to treat you like a princess, then he doesn't deserve you the way you are. And you get told the same foolish things that are being taught everywhere else. And this is why a generation raised on that stuff said, what do I need the church for then? You also, ladies, need to learn how to be discerning and wise for your husbands. I'm not here to berate you. I'm here to remind you You've got to learn to love your husband like a man needs to be loved. Stop insisting that he receive help the way a female needs help. Learn the way he needs to be loved and then provide that for him. We can help you with that as a congregation. We've talked about this a lot, about what he needs. He needs patience from you. Guys, take time to decide, first of all, how they feel about something, and if it's worth talking about. Give him a minute. Why aren't you talking to me? Because he's thinking about it. That's why. He doesn't, well, how do you not know what you feel? It's how it is, ladies. I don't know what to tell you. Well, something's wrong with you. You must have some sort of disorder. No, he's got a Y chromosome. And that means that we don't always know what we're feeling. Why are you so cold? Why are you so calculating? That's how we've got to be sometimes, ladies. It's a skill of ours. It's an advantage, which means you need to learn how to be patient with it. It'll take me, I love telling this story. It's just such a great illustration. In earlier years of our marriage, and my first grandfather passed away. How are you feeling? I'm, sad, but I'm feeling okay. Feeling pretty good. And he's like, really? I was like, yeah, it was sad that it happened, but we knew, he was getting older. And the next couple of days, I was real tired. I didn't really want to get up and do anything, and just kind of would drift off in conversation. And I'll never forget this. And I go, I don't know what's going on with me. I'm just feeling like this. And she's just listening. And I go, I said, I think I'm sad. And she goes, well, of course you're sad. Your grandpa just passed away. I go, oh, yeah, that's true. I was having a hard time connecting those wires. And listen, that's not uncommon. We have a hard time with that sometimes. So you got to be patient with it. You shaking him by the scruff of the neck is not going to make it go any faster. Love him the way he needs to be loved. Respect him. When he comes home and maybe he's agitated, he's been in traffic, he's been dealing with people, he saw something on the news, he got a phone call he wasn't expecting, and he's agitated, be respectful anyway. Be respectful anyway. That's what he needs from you. Maybe he just needs a minute to get out in the yard and hit something for a while. Don't be scared of him. When he comes home and he's not in a perfectly buoyant mood bearing roses and daffodils, don't be like, oh, watch out, children, he might hurt you. No, he might not hurt you. He's a good man. He needs your respect. When he has ideas, listen to them. When he makes a decision, say, yes, I'll go with you on that. And more than anything else, your husband needs your loyalty, ladies. Stop seeking attention from anybody else. You don't need it. You don't need it. That might mean you might need to delete a few social media apps. Good, it'd be better for you that way anyhow. That means you're not going to be withholding yourself from him. You're not going to be even giving him the impression that there might be somebody else. You're never going to give him that impression that he's not quite measuring up to what you always hoped for. You tell him that he's the one you've always hoped for, and you're not going anywhere. And you don't care how long it takes. Most men are desperate. They feel desperate in life. Trying to get ahead, trying to provide, trying to protect, trying to live up to that standard I was talking about before. And what many of them and most of them need is a good woman. Be that for him, ladies. That's the partnership. It's not him alone learning to give you what you need, but you learning to give him what he needs. Maybe you think that because you're a woman, you understand relationships. Well, you might understand your end of it. Ladies certainly spend more time thinking about their end of it, or at least talking about it. There's a whole other half, though, that you've got to learn. And ultimately, it's pointing one another to Jesus. Peter told the husbands in verse 7 of that chapter I read a while back, he said, husbands, dwell with your wives with understanding. That means understand what she is and give her that. But it equally applies to you, ladies. Dwell with your husbands with understanding. Understand what he is, who he is, and then give him that. And then you'll be together as that whole. And we finish up this chapter. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim. So David had also married another woman, Ahinoam. She's going to be the mother of Amnon, which is a disaster of a human being. We'll meet him later. And Abigail is actually rarely mentioned again. This is kind of her big story. Meanwhile, Saul had taken David's first wife away and married her to somebody else. How infuriated must David have been? Imagine if that happened to you, gentlemen. If somebody was trying to kill you, so you had to go on the run, and then that man took your wife and she married somebody else. We're going to deal with this later. 2 Samuel chapter 3, we'll come back to that. David's going to say, I'll be your king, but I want my wife back now. Real briefly here, David's got 3 wives now, 2.5, I guess you could say. Polygamy was never God's design, obviously. God did not create Adam and Eve and her 3 sisters. And in fact, the church is the one that has led the way in reinstituting the proper way marriage ought to be. That's why 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1 both say leaders in the church need to be husbands of one wife. And modern men scratch their heads and wonder what could that possibly mean? Because it means don't marry more than one woman. But we think, well, that's so obvious. It hasn't always been so obvious. Of course, now everybody's going off in this weird polyamory thing, like that's new, and like that's not going to end in a million broken hearts. But it was part of the culture this time. And at the risk of sounding bad here, I guess, it seems to be a lesser sin in God's eyes. Certainly lesser than adultery would be. But over time it would be fixed. Proverbs 31, verse 30. Can I read one more verse from this chapter? Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. There's not a man in this room that would not like a loyal, wise companion like Abigail, who gets him to walk through life with. Now we know, we don't always live up to the example of Abigail, so no gentleman in here needs to take this as an opportunity to let his wife know all the ways she's falling short. Some people will only hear their thing and not what's actually being said. And the guys are not always going to live up to the example of David. More often we feel like Nabal. And there might be a lady in here saying, yeah, I'm married to Nabal. I'd love to have a David, but I've got a Nabal. But can we at least agree on something? That we will aspire to be like that? We will aspire and make it our goal and our constant project to be like Abigail and her wise and discernment, or David and his strength, but also his willingness to listen to good counsel? Can you at least promise you'll never give up on each other? If you are going into your marriage and you're saying, I will do some of what God asked me to do, but the rest of it, it's just 2024, and that's just the way I am, and it's how I was raised, and you got to get used to it. You are building a foundation of sand, and when the storms come, it's all going to wash away, and you're going to blame God. Instead, you can do what Jesus taught us, which is to love one another. If we're supposed to love our enemies, friends, how much more are we supposed to love the one that we're married to? I invite you to take this day to renew your love, your loyalty to each other. And when you get in the car, maybe say something like, all right, sweetheart, was Tyler completely out of line today? Or was he right about some of those things? Gentlemen, this is your opportunity to say, well, yeah, these are the parts I liked. And she might say something, okay, what can I do better? He might not have an answer right away. Just pay attention. Love that man the way